In the quiet embrace of his studio, the sculptor dances with his tools, each stroke of the chisel breathing life into the unyielding clay. The camera glides through the scene, revealing the artist at his table, where sketches of fantastical forms come to life on paper. Each line drawn is a whisper of inspiration, a promise of what could be. As the montage unfolds, we witness the alchemy of creation, hands immersed in rich, cool clay, shaping figures that seem to pulse with emotion. The kiln hums with anticipation, transforming raw earth into enduring beauty, while the artist's heart beats in rhythm with the pulse of his work. Each piece emerges not just as a sculpture, but as a testament to the power of imagination, capturing the essence of life itself. In this world of three dimensions, the sculptor's passion is palpable, a vivid expression of the human experience sculpted in clay.
Although there is plenty of reference material for Tom and Jerry online, I needed a framework for the build to keep the project organized and cohesive. Tom and Jerry must be interacting in some way with each other, and the piece of the environment around them should be connected to the pose relationship. I initially started with AI images to help me plan the scene, although these were not licensed references to Tom and Jerry. Likewise, most 2D images of the duo are not directly translatable to 3D imagery. Even my drawing of the poses and positions will not look like the final build, due to the needs of symmetry and definition, and my own attention to detail and perspective. My original plan was to build the models for a diorama to the scale of the sketches. However, after I built an initial head for Jerry, I realized that the sketches were far too large for a 1-to-1 ratio. So instead, I built Jerry much smaller, still following the guide of the sketch, which I wanted to capture an angry, disgruntled Jerry, taking directives from the prison guard Tom. While sculpting the basic mouse head, I realized that as small as it was, a very subtle approach to forming the face was all that was needed. The result came out far better than I had originally hoped, and is a recognizable homage to our titular mouse. The first body I built for Jerry was never intended to be the final build, but was meant to get a grip on the perspective of his cartoon features, magnified slightly to realism for the sake of the 3D result. This also meant giving Jerry a bit of muscle to appropriately fill out the orange jumpsuit and make him look tough. Details for Jerry would need to be minimal, yet detail can still be expressed with shape and line to fully express the mood and attitude of the character. With a well-formed visual of the best path forward, the armature was easy to frame to the scale of the mock body. In building up the form with pieces of clay, I focused as much on Jerry's muscle and balance as to the basic pear shape of his torso. A triangle of white clay and overlaid lapels give the illusion of outerwear, while adding the collar before the placement of the head gives me a place to build a supportive nest of clay to hold it in place. It will be important to make sure the lapel is bent down where his head meets it, with his gaze turned toward his nemesis. Although this consideration will not be crucial until the piece is ready to be baked and set. Oversized cuffs allow the space for connecting the forearms and hands, while a single large breast pocket, small strands of clay to outline the rise of wrinkles at the action points, and a tiny white tag with a barely legible Department of Corrections ID number help to round out the defining details of Jerry's role. Jerry is small enough that building his hands and feet do not require any extreme detail to look legitimate to the cartoony realism of the model, so simple shapes and small fingers and toes will help to enhance the intended visual. He will be striding defiantly in his final pose, so neither of his feet will meet the floor flatly. The toes of his back foot will be pushing away from the floor, while the heel of his forward foot will be the only contact point of that foot. The only real detail to maintain is that his toes should be uniform in size and shape. The hands, as well, will be simple, as he will have both hands clenched in little fists of passive-aggressive compliance. The cuffs of the jumpsuit legs will provide a similar socket for the feet, which will be formed around the mounting points of the wire armature. This will ensure the final model is strong enough to support its own weight where it will be mounted to the floor. A final check to make sure the head is proportionate and to establish its angle related to Jerry's posture while facing Tom's relative position, I formed the nest of clay to hold his head in place, since any visible part of his little neck will be obscured by the flared collar of the jumpsuit. After looking at the model from multiple angles and happy with the result, it is time to bake the body. This will prevent any deforming of the finished body and detail while forming and fitting the hands and feet securely in place. The forearms are built over the armature wire, molded into the sockets of the jumpsuit cuffs, and the hands are fitted to the wrists over the exposed tip of the wire. Small pieces of clay will be used to pad the palm side of the hands and improve the durability of the finished arm. The feet are mounted in much the same way as the hands, although with no visible legs showing, the feet will meet at the cuffs. To prevent mashing the clay over the wire, the feet are mounted to the form with slight pressure, and additional clay is added to build up the heels. The long stride of Jerry's pose will only allow the anchor of one foot, which will be the forward foot. This is because the armature extending from the heel will provide more durability than the armature running through the whole foot and emerging from the toes. Although Jerry was greatly reduced from the scale of the sketch, it was important to keep him significantly smaller than the cat. This meant that Tom might still be built to the original scale. A figure of this size will require stronger armature. I was concerned at this point because the model seemed to require a 10-inch tomcat. After building Jerry's original head to the size of the drawing, I understood the challenge of building a head almost 3 inches wide. It was while I compared the mouse proportions to the cat that I noticed I forgot to put a tail on Jerry. This gave me an excuse to step away from the cat quandary and mull over my life choices moving forward. I am nothing, if not absolutely committed to the little details. Although Jerry might not recognize his predecessor, the scale of the original mouse head gave me a comparison for building the cat head. Returning to my sketch of Tom, I realized that a 10-inch cat was not going to work. However, I did not need to build a new frame. I just compressed the height and thickness of the one I had, straightened out the arms to determine new shoulder spacing, and left the extra length of wire for the time being. This allowed the reduction of the overall height by more than an inch and reduced the head size needed to a svelte 2-inch diameter, a much more reasonable build. Now that Jerry's tail was cool, a quick smoothing to remove any remaining lumps or bumps, and Jerry's swagger could be completed. I planned on building Tom's face in one attempt. However, as I tried to balance a 2D character with the needs of a 3D model, this proved more troubling than I thought. Specifically in this case, the cartoon cat has no lower eyelids, while my physical model required some indication of separation from his eyes and muzzle. This need forced the eyes to be positioned too far up his face, and he did not look like Tom, or even a cat. I tried to subtly form the face like Jerry's. However, this pushed the eyes back, making them farther apart and almond-shaped. I kind of liked the overall aesthetic of the look, but it did not meet my needs for the project. It looked more like a real cat, or the original version of Tom from 1936. The muzzle and snout came out well, however, so I kept that part, reformed the basic ball of his head above it, and tried again. For the second attempt, I used googly eyes to visualize the result for the face. I might have even used them instead of forming eyes from clay, if the plastic ones could withstand the heat of baking. The lower eyelid problem still existed, and even though I tried to mitigate the distortion of the cartoon with this minor detail, it still did not feel like I was expressing Thomas successfully. I swapped out the Google eyes with clay ones and built the brows around them, forming a small rise between the eyes, leading to the muzzle. This was necessary to keep the muzzle from just being two round poofs on his face. Speaking of which, Tom's muzzle is not perfectly rounded, so I triangulated each side just a bit to give it the subtle peak of his classic 2/3 profile trademark charm. Despite my efforts, the eyes were still too high and too far apart, so even though I did keep the snout, I scrubbed away the front of his face to try yet again. This time, I pushed the starting point for the eyes below the top line of the muzzle, giving me some room to build up from without losing the core character of Thomas. When I realized that the eyes were still too high, I removed them carefully and reset them as low as possible without unnecessarily damaging parts of the face I wanted to keep. This spaced the eyes much farther apart than the cartoon, but is an unavoidable consequence of the shape of the build in relation to its size. Building the front of the face around the eyes brought the forehead and temples forward and helped to justify the translation from cartoon to stylized realism. The larger build requires different techniques to produce similar results. For the smaller mouse head, I build the lower lip from the chin's underpiece of clay by lightly easing it forward to meet the muzzle and shape it accordingly. On the much larger cat, this did not produce the same result as it did on the tiny mouse, and required adding the mass of the lower mouth separately and forming it to the under chin piece.
Fine, so we are going 10 to the bar. Okay, so ready, set.
While deciding how to best approach the furry side mane, I referred to digital 3D renderings of Tom, which helped to visualize a plan. In retrospect, I believe I may have a better idea than this one. At some point, I'm sure I'll tackle another cartoon build and I'll test the idea. For the sake of this project, however, I used a solution similar to a previous build of Sonic the Hedgehog. The head is not attached to the armature, but will be anchored to the body by the clay itself and a piece of wire for support. This gives me more freedom in positioning the head in a natural angle, especially when the head will be tilted and leading the motion of the body. And speaking of which, while the frame for Tom has been shortened, keeping a distinct size difference between the cat and mouse will help to sell the complete scene. Jerry is all but complete, meaning that I am committed to the prospect of building a very tall clay figure that is capable of standing upright without support. I plan to accomplish this with short legs, large feet meeting the floor flatly, and keeping the weight of the body as light as possible while keeping the slightly oversized head proportionate and balanced. Thomas has very large ears that taper all the way around to the back of his head in the cartoons. This usually makes a 3/4 profile image of him appear to have his ears extend from his eyebrow in 2 dimensions. The challenge here is to make the ear look like Tom's ear while making it fit a solid round head. This also must be mitigated with the presence of a matching ear on the other side that fits naturally as well, looks feasible from the opposite side view, and does not take up the entire space of the top of the head. The ear frames look good, so the next step is aluminum foil to form the ear and to cone it slightly, so it is not flat and follows the contour of the head. Even if I were to use white clay for the entire build, I would still form the pieces of the inner and outer ear separately. This technique works well in giving the ear a slight thickness, while defining the definition of the inner ear, a technique that works very well with rabbit ears too. After attaching the ears, it was clear that something did not seem right. I thought I had simply put the ears on the wrong sides, but it eventually became clear that these ears were too large, making Tom appear to be more fox-like. Likewise, they were set too far back on the head if I was trying to keep the image as close to the source material as possible. When studying the result at length, it was clear that the best course of action was to rebuild the ears. I stripped them down to the wire frames, adjusted the curves to make the ears a bit wider, but also shorter. I compensated for the ears extending to the base of the head by lowering them slightly to bring them more forward along the curve of the head. While there are still angles which betray the illusion, especially on film, the reformed ears are much better, meeting 2 criteria. They look like Tom's ears, and they are proportionate to the final design. Returning to the body, building it up gave me an opportunity to experiment with considerably basic and clearly untrained stop-motion filming. Practice for a large-scale project later this year. The arms will have full sleeves, so there is no need for muscle or joint definition, with only a slight protrusion for the right elbow, set akimbo to the hip. The uniform shirt will be separated from the pants by an oversized utility belt, requiring only moderate definition at this early stage. While Tom typically does have a small, slender neck to support his quite spherical cranium, I build up the shoulders to frame a nest for his head and define the collar of the shirt. The uniform shirt will be short-sleeved, with a full-sleeve undershirt. The wrinkles of the undershirt can be added now, and the external sleeves will be pieces of flat clay wrapped around the upper arms to keep the illusion that the outer sleeve is separate from the inner. The uniform shirt as well should not be too wrinkled, but will still have natural creasing as it moves with the body. Pressure creases from the belt can also be added now, with a clear line of where the belt will sit. If the outer sleeves were longer or looser, I would have used a more flexible modeling clay to prevent any damage to the finished product. However, these sleeves are fully supported by the arm beneath it and will require significant pressure to cause damage after it is baked. While I am making most of this up as I go, I am still planning implementation carefully. Fully convinced I like the way it looks, I now consign Tom's head to the oven to bake his ears and jowls. While the head bakes, I continue with the process of building up to its nest. The collar is like Jerry's, but will require a crisper fold and will have to meet at the buttons for the application of a tie. Small pinches will reduce the apparent thickness of the collar and add a professional flair to the tips. The uniform tie must extend to the belt line without hanging below it. On an average torso, this would only require a short tie, but Tom's feline body length will require a deceptively long tie, opting for an exaggerated broadness at the tip for the sake of caricature. The back of the tie would also not be visible on the uniform, but is left exposed for the purpose of life detail. The tie meets at the collar, with no need to extend beneath it. Uniform ties are clip-on for the safety of the officer, and while the uniform shirt should not have wrinkles, it does have intentional pleats. The legs are short and thick, again requiring very little creasing from the pant legs for the pose. Building up the thickness with even layers is intended to prevent air pockets from being trapped inside the clay. Although the utility belt will completely cover the point where the shirt is tucked into the pants, I intend to fully detail the top of the pants to make sure curves and wrinkles look right before I add the belt. The front flap of the pants covering the zipper is a single rectangle of clay, pressed lightly into place, smoothed in on one side and lightly creased on the other to match horizontal creasing. The uniform has large pockets, which will help determine the placement of the badge and name tag. While this is the de facto style of uniform for law enforcement, security, and paramilitary organizations in corrections, it is often supplanted with a more casual polo shirt and khaki pants. However, this version of the uniform serves to make Tom look much more commanding and professional. No CO pocket is complete without a pin. The patch and flag will be the final details on the uniform shirt and provide visual recognition of organizational membership. There is no particular badge design for corrections, and like most law enforcement organizations, it depends on the individual department. This badge matches the patch in that regard. The vertical pleats complete the back of the shirt, but were not crucial to the front due to the amount of detail already present. The utility belt does not hold up the pants, but is supported in place with keepers that fasten to the trouser belt. However, the utility belt must be secure in place and not droop like a gunslinger. The belt is durable, thick, and sturdy. The crosshatch pattern will apply a cloth effect, and the horizontal lines will represent the stitching lines. The ends of the belt will not meet in the front, but will be joined by a side-release tactical buckle with a smooth black surface. The various pouches and cases for the belt will simply be folded small strips of clay over little rectangles of aluminum, with the only differences being comparative size and design for specific items. This piece is a radio and leather case, with an open top and partially exposed sides. I added detail for the basic representation of the radio and kept it from blending into the top of the case. Speaker holes, knobs, and a stubby antenna will complete the radio, lacking only a mic cord. Small leather straps hold the radio in place and snap to the case with a little button. A few extra details on the side of the radio, a cap on top of the antenna, and it's done. The small, rectangular holster will house a slender canister. I could have built the case as one piece, but opted to use a small length of dowel topped with shaped orange clay. This will allow the content of the case to be visible and readily within reach if Jerry decides not to cooperate with Tom's directives. Two cases are completed, and on to the third. A small double loop of wire will represent the handcuffs in a slightly rounded oval case with a partially open top strap held in place with a snap. I wanted to use small keys for the key ring, but could only find one random tiny key, leaving me to build additional keys from clay to place behind the silver key. All other items on the belt for this build are pouches, and the three primary components on the belt will be placed in tactical positions. Small pieces of clay attached at the top of each will serve as facsimile clips to the belt, but the natural adhesive quality of the clay will be enough to hold the items in place. Two small strips on either side of the buckle add dimension to the mechanics of the belt and diminish empty space. The face of the buckle should be smooth and flat. I want most of the belt covered and determined that 3 various pouches will be enough to fill in the belt, while still leaving some small area of the belt easily visible. Two small pouches and a larger one for the back of the belt will be enough to make this utility belt recognizable, if not a little exaggerated. There are several ways to wear a radio with a shoulder mic. A common way is to wear the radio on the same side from hip to shoulder to keep the cord from coiling round the body. This is the method preferred by Officer Tom. The expanding coil of the cord should retain a frugal length at rest, as it can stretch easily when needed and connect to the radio to the mic, typically affixed to the shoulder lapel. With the coil formed, the lapels are next. The left shoulder will be slightly bowed due to the outstretched arm, while the right one will be slightly pulled forward by the weight of the mic clipped to the back of the flap. Quick lines add the sleeve seams, and the mic is a small box, square at the front and back, and about half as wide on the sides. A small face speaker and an orange button are key features. I added the clip on the back of the mic and attached it to the dent in the back of the lapel. The fingers I am building here are not the first attempt, but the final attempt to match the size of the hands proportionate to the body and keep the fingers from being too long and claw-like. I have changed the right hand from palm up against the hip to a more casual, resting open-fingered palm down on a belt pouch. The left hand will still be pointing out like the original sketch. Each hand is a small square of clay, thick enough to support wires, and has 3 fingers and a thumb, extending from the wires. I adjusted the position of the fingers before applying the clay to keep from smashing them, then removed excessive length from the exposed wires to keep from pushing them all the way through the hand when I set the fingers in place. I spaced the fingers apart to set them in position and shaped the hand to make knuckles, tendons, and palm pads. Then I pressed the sides of the hand in to make a more rectangular shape and to set the fingers more naturally closer together. The thumb of the right hand is added separately and positioned extended down to make an open cup where the fingers will extend toward the belt. The hand is pressed gently into place and positioned to rest as naturally as possible, following the angle of the arm. The right hand is put together in the same manner with the finger wires pre-shaped for the intended position of the pointing gesture. The hand is lightly pressed into place, using the wire for support and a small piece of clay to reinforce the palm side. Along with the sleeve cuff, this will create a strong final build after baking. The cuff fits closely to the hand, but must appear to be separate, while the back of the cuff is blended into the arm. I take a moment to add the broom bristle whiskers to Jerry's left muzzle with basic Elmer's glue, then continue with Tom by building up the head's nest in his collar. Opting for a thicker, furry approach to securing the head in place will allow me a greater range for positioning the head tilt naturally to follow the flow of the body pose in relation to Jerry. With the core part of Tom baked, it is time to position the mic cord in place, giving it a casual droop as it hangs from the mic and reaches around Tom's side to the radio. Once it is adjusted and looks natural, it is secured in place with liquid clay, which will seal it in during the next baking. A small casing support around the base of the mic and the radio is complete. While Tom bakes, Jerry gets his right side whisker implants in pre-formed follicles. Note that these were imprinted before baking and angled to ensure the whiskers pointed out correctly. The building of the feet and support system for mounting the figure are important to coordinate correctly for balance, support, and durability. Tom's feet are going to be large enough that an aluminum foil core will be necessary, while also allowing me to make sure the feet are the same size. I constructed both feet in the same way, to also help ensure that they end up matching in appearance as well. Looking much like little shoes, these basic feet will help to gauge the size needed for support without making the feet too large aesthetically. Equally important, this step ensures that the armature extends deep enough to anchor, that the feet are positioned naturally for the pose, and that Tom will be able to support his own weight even without the stand. The heels are reinforced at the back of the feet to build up the clay mass around the mounting point. Unlike Jerry, I did not forget Tom's tail and had been looking forward to making it. Tom's tail is iconic and distinct. I wanted to capture that feel while making a functionally realistic-looking model for my build. Once shaped and smoothed sufficiently, the tail is guided into place, where it will also get a subtle flap at its extension through the material of the pants. I will also be using the large pouch at the back of the belt to anchor the tail in place in the middle. While most of Tom's fur is covered by the uniform, I chose not to apply a fur effect to Tom's face and extremities. The tail, however, did not look quite right smooth. The thin tail and reattached radio antenna can be adequately hardened by a 10-minute session with a heat gun. Jerry is now ready to stand upright and await painting at a safe distance from the immediate work area, and I begin making Tom's large toes. I will be making the toes exactly the same way, with the exact amounts of clay, to ensure his toes are uniform. Any size difference can be balanced by choosing the order in which the toes are placed. With the toes in place, only gentle blending is needed to shape them to the feet. Tom is already balanced, so the toes will only be providing slight support to the baked result. A heating gun puts out enough heat to fully harden small pieces of clay or local areas of a build. Approximately 10 minutes of heating in this manner is all it takes to fully bake the feet in place. I noticed cracks in Tom's heels, which did not seem to extend through the whole foot, so I opted for an additional thick coat of liquid clay to reinforce the toes and seal the cracks, completing the build and moving to the next step of painting. An editorial note: the utility belt and all its components are black, so I opted to distinguish the belt from the items with a charcoal gray. The pouches are black, and the cases are a black umber mix, with umber streaks to represent scuffed dyed leather. The diorama is going to be much more than an open-sided box with colored paper backgrounds. I have been planning this phase since the beginning of the project, getting my supplies together and plotting the best means of building a solid, transportable finished product. The box will serve as the base of the scene, while providing support for lifting and moving the diorama safely. As the base, the frame also dictates the dimensions of the box scene. Crafting paper will cover the cardboard backside of the diorama and is glued in place with Mod Podge. The front wall of the wooden box is not needed for the scene or for support, so this strip of wood is removed and set to the side. The space for the handle is cut out of the cardboard wall to match the wooden frame. The bottom of the wooden box is recessed, with the sides holding the bottom of the box from contacting the cardboard surface. Therefore, gluing the box in place will not work, so I opt for a row of staples along the entire edge. The weight of the diorama will all be on the wooden box. The cardboard will not bear any weight and is only a wraparound feature. The remaining side of the box is now repurposed as spacers between the cardboard backing and the interior walls of the diorama. The handle edge of the wooden box will make the inner walls tilt in otherwise. Officer Tom is directing inmate Jerry to go to his mouse-sized cell, but the recalcitrant cheese thief is reluctant to comply. It was important to keep both characters facing forward. I did not want Jerry to be upstaged by Tom or hard to see clearly from the front. This requires Jerry to walk away from his cell door rather than toward it. The cell door was always going to be in the closed corner of the stage. The stands for the characters will also be the supports for the floor of the scene. Knowing where the characters will stand allows me to plan the construction of the stage. The supports are secured to the frame, and the floor is secured to the supports to create a solid construction. The concrete floor is made with textured, flat gray art paper, embellished with ink, paint, and glue. The center edge will be covered with lines and made to look like the seam between the concrete slabs. The overhanging edge of the paper will be folded down gently and tucked under to give the diorama a closed-view base. Once all is aligned and confirmed, the floor pieces are sealed together, and a small piece of wood the same thickness as the stands will provide support at the seam, and a final check makes sure the stands are fully sealed in place. I want the cell door to look like a cartoon mouse hole, so the door is rounded rather than a rectangle. I solved this by using a doorknob sign, cut to the length needed for the door, and a circle from the bottom half cut out to fill the round hole. A small rectangle is cut out of the center for the cell window. A second small triangle is cut out below the window for a food port in the door. The metal door is simulated with textured art paper, which will receive a very thick coat of dark gray paint. I thought my floor was ready, but I missed a spot. So, while that glue dried, I began detailing my concrete floor. Solid lines spanning the gap will create the slab seam in the floor. Hand-drawn cracks in the concrete extending from the seam offsets the detail of the floor and draws the eye away from the seam in the paper. A quick wash of dark gray to stain the floor. A thin coat of Mod Podge will secure the paper to the cardboard floor. While the floor dries, the door is cut out with a border around the wood frame. The border allows for the paper to be folded over the edge and glued to the back of the wood to create the illusion of thickness in the door. The window and food port are cut with diagonal slits to fold over the insets as well. The edges are cut diagonally to prevent the folded paper from buckling, while the arch of the door is cut at intervals for the same purpose. A thick but smooth coat of clear drying Mod Podge will give the concrete floor the illusion of a hastily applied coat of wax. The result will also allow a slight reflection to occur in the floor when looked upon at low angles. The folded seams on the door are glued and set one side at a time to make sure the door stays smooth and solid. The small flaps of the window and food port are taped in place to save time on such small pieces. The window is accomplished with a stiff piece of transparent plastic, which will also be randomly scratched across the surface for effect. The food port lid will fold down to a horizontal position and must look thick enough to be a part of a security door. The finished piece can be set aside to fully dry, and the dried stage can be set in place in the frame. The holes in the stand are now extended through the paper floor, and the characters can be test fit for their positions. The stage is set in place and weighted to ensure it hardens fully attached to the frame. While it dries, I use a wire to link the hinge of the food port door and hold the piece in place with some flexibility. The wire is threaded through the base of the food port door and taped to the sides of the door frame. The back of the door will not be visible but will be cut loosely to size and added for additional support of the window and food port hinge. I noticed here that my floor was not as firm as I thought. My solution to this problem was to build a hidden support by using floorboards. My advantage here is that the construction does not rely on gravity. The floorboards will be mounted to the walls and apply pressure to the floor, holding it in place and removing the weakness while appearing to be fully attached to the floor. The door frame will define the placement of the floorboard, and I want it to be as seamless as possible. I realized that I needed something behind the plexiglass of the cell door window to give some illusion of space behind it. Before I locked it in, I did the same for the food port. To keep my floor as even as possible, I used a level to find the plane for the floor and extended that to the floorboards. This was meant to keep the illusion of a solid, level surface. The walls of the diorama will fit easily in place, once trimmed, and plumbed to the floorboards and door frames. The lower walls will be painted to look like plaster, meeting a brick wall halfway up. For this build, halfway is about 3 inches. The wallpaper is glued to the walls, with some overlap on the leading wall to close off the diorama edge. The whole sheets of brick are glued in place, ensuring the seal to the edges so they can be folded around the edge of the diorama. Slender strips cover the wall seams and will be painted the same color as the door frames. The walls are fit and ready to set in place. The arch of the cell door frame is a tactical challenge for me and my limited supplies. I settled on several small lengths of dowel wrapped in aluminum and bent to shape. I fill in the wall around the frame and glue in a fitted piece of brick paper, and the walls are ready to glue in. Finishing touches include painting the lower walls, adding holes in the plaster and graffiti. I paint the cell door so that it looks thick, with a visible undercoat that is apparent at the edges and in the vandalism.
Tom, the cat, stood tall in his crisp uniform, a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes, as he escorted the notorious Jerry the Mouse to his cell. The corridors echoed with the faint sound of clinking metal, a reminder of the order he had restored. Once a menace, Jerry had terrorized the local cheese shops, sneaking away with Gouda and Parmesan like a phantom. But today, justice had prevailed. As Jerry shuffled forward, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast against the gray walls, Tom couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. He had dedicated his life to safeguarding the community from cheese theft, and this moment was the culmination of countless stakeouts and clever traps. Yet beneath his proud exterior, Tom wondered if there was more to Jerry than just his criminal past. Perhaps in time, he would uncover the story behind the mouse who had made cheese his life's ambition.